Man, this video has been kind of in development hell. I was planning to release it around mid-March, but I didn't really end up feeling satisfied with most of the drafts for the script, and I honestly had a hard time putting my feelings of the series accurately into words. That, and also I've been on and off about whether I should go over the plot of this entire series, given how despite its more than 10 years existence, it's still niche as all hell, with at the time of writing exactly one other video on YouTube that mentions it by name. That also happens to be a Dwayne Rock Johnson meme of all things.
Why are your boobs so big?
They're not boobs.
Though now I think I've managed to put my thoughts into paper reasonably well at this point. So, without further ado, let's talk about MyStereoBot. Initially released on May 5th, 2013 and ending publication on June 6, 2017, MyStereoBot is a webcomic series first releasing on SmackJeeves before being uploaded on other sites like Webtoons and Tapaz, created by Bioatomic. The series would gain a very small cult following, and eventually a spin-off called Ribbon Shorts and a sequel series called Don't Worry Terry Blockin' would be made shortly after the series wrapped up, with the latter still ongoing. Ish. This is a topic I've been wanting to get to since the beginning of this channel, but never got to for XYZ reason. But now, at last, without further ado, let's dive into this analog dream, shall we? The first thing you'll notice are the character designs, and you know what? I think they're pretty neat. Some of them are based on inanimate objects in the real world, and others are their own thing. It's kinda cool to get introduced to a new character and to try to figure out whether they have ties to reality or not. Or sometimes it's just funny to try to guess for the sake of it. Like, what are you? A GameCube? You probably are. Checks out. And the in-universe explanation for this? Well, they're robots. Yep, you heard that right. Most characters in the story are robots, though it's a bit confusing because some of them have to eat, they have their own creation mythos, and they can have sex apparently, I guess. They're a lot closer to aliens than anything, especially since humans are treated as such in their world with both having their own planets to themselves, which will come into play once I start talking about the story, which I'll save for later. First and foremost, this is a character-driven narrative, which means while not a whole lot happens plot-wise, it's more about how the characters feel about the situations they're in and their interactions with others. Infinity is an antisocial stereohead who's been ostracized his entire life for his unique appearance, even for his own kind, and spends most of his time in his room listening to music that comes out of his head, and most of it is music that also exists in real life, which is neat, albeit the music choices are a bit outdated.
Sunshine, lollipops, sunshine, sunshine, lollipops, and...
Like, I know this comic came out in 2013, but I honestly don't know how to feel about the fact that the song that plays when he's depressed is Lacrimosa of all things. Alongside him, you've got his boyfriend Cloudburn, who acts as sort of the polar opposite to Infinity. He's extroverted, abrasive, and reckless, which leads him to sometimes disregard the wants of others. While both of them love each other deeply, it's not hard to get the sense that their relationship is filled with disagreements and misunderstandings that weigh down on the both of them. You've got Infinity's cousin Ohm, who acts as the voice of reason for most of the story, and also might be responsible for half the story's conflict, but I'll get to that later in the story section. And finally, you've got Quentz, a mysterious individual who's basically Kaji. Instead of turning to watermelons as a coping mechanism, he turned to smoking. While all of these characters might seem a bit one-dimensional on the surface, it doesn't take long before the layers start to peel back and we learn more about the characters' internal struggles. By the midpoint, it's hard not to sympathize with everyone, especially as things start to get more hectic. The story begins with Infinity telling the audience how much he likes to be naked before Cloudburn and Ohm barge into his room to drag him to a nightclub.
When will she stop dancing? When will it stop?
And while there, Infinity temporarily separates from Cloudburn as the elusive Quince shows up and starts chatting him up, introducing him to the in-universe equivalent of alcohol. Cloudburn takes notice and calls him out on it, leading Quince to give Cloud secondhand smoke. Infinity leaves in a rage, and the next day news of a human craft landing is announced, prompting everyone to go and investigate. There, a militia group called the Legionnaires are dispatched to investigate the craft. A militia group which Cloudburn was supposed to join but was rejected for unknown reasons. The craft is ordered destroyed, but to prove its harmlessness, Cloudburn pushes Infinity directly in scanning range of the craft, and scan it does, resulting in the Legionnaires destroying it immediately. Later, Infinity and Co. are being interrogated by Commander Yuvin for possible memory erasure from the events that have occurred that day. And here we get to take a look into some of the conflicts each of the characters face in their own personal lives. And we learn the fact that humans have been abducting robots for a while, with no real leads on who specifically are the culprits of said abductions. Also, we get introduced to Cloudburn's brother Cyrus. Everyone is sent home, knowing full well that the incident definitely won't have any long-lasting consequences. Infinity goes home to visit his mother, only to find Yuvin alongside her. As if calling him son wasn't already a salt in his wound. By the way, his dad left him at a young age. He also calls himself a counselor for his troubles as well, to keep in watch in case of anything out of the ordinary were to happen. Another flashback between Ohm and Infinity later, and back in present day they both go to visit Cloudburn's house. Infinity complains about the commander's decision to try to fix him, and when Infinity asks about possible daddy issues, Cloudburn then goes on an entire speech about his strained relationship with his parents. This totally won't be important later. Ohm is then kicked out as Infinity and Cloudburn engage in
disgusting mortal coitus.
The next morning, Infinity wakes to see the Legionnaires trash-talking Cloudburn while Cyrus chastises them, and then apologizes to Infinity for Cloudburn's behavior. Nightmare sequence, nightmare sequence, nightmares! And Ohm wakes up. Then it jumps forward to Care Code Day, a festivity where people give gifts to each other. He gives a cactus to his mother, who is still hanging out with Yuvin, leading to Infinity fearing she might try to date him, as she's had a history of dating several other men in the past with little to no success, and she hasn't taken too kindly to the idea of Infinity and Cloudburn dating. Later at a diner, he rants about the recent events to Ohm, and Ohm basically tells him to cope and tries to confront Infinity about his deteriorating relationship with Cloudburn. Quince shows up again and reveals his parents own the diner, which means despite working as a waiter, he can just sit down with whomever he pleases without losing his job. And after changing into his skater clothes, he gets into Quince's car and checks his phone, only to see Cloudburn hasn't contacted him all day. At the skater rink, he meets a bunch of other weirdos, and after most of the crowd has left, he finally takes the opportunity to get out there and rock out to some Daft Punk. Which, to interrupt for a little bit, this comic has a lot of references to pop culture, with Daft Punk being referenced frequently especially. I'm personally not a fan of Daft Punk, but I can still respect the homages to them throughout. Anyways, back to the story. Infinity trips. After gaining his bearings, he agrees to a drinking game to some Michael Bay movies, and everyone gets wasted, including the miner. Infinity abruptly admits to Quince that he wishes to break up with Cloudburn and get with Quince, but still has some attachment to Cloudburn. As you've probably guessed, shit's about to go south. Another flashback where Infinity suggests they both go to a place called Roller Heaven, to which Cloudburn rebukes cause it's gay. Cause, you know, two bros chilling in a bedroom 5 centimeters apart cause they're not gay. He wakes up to find himself back at home where his mom finally reveals she's dating Yuvin. And after Infinity partially tells her what happened, she tells him to do a smart thing for once and just visit his house already. He goes to school only to find out other people found out about Infinity's and Quince's exchange the other night, with Cloudburn barging in, throwing the gift he got for Infinity, and leaving in anger, prompting Infinity to chase after him and finding him sitting by a tree, where an argument commences with Quince and Ohm eventually joining before a figure lands nearby. This figure incapacitates everyone in the immediate vicinity and kidnaps Infinity in front of everyone. Yuvin gets the news of the events while Infinity wakes up, as we're introduced to a new character who promises to not hurt him anymore, pulling back to reveal him in space. This portion of the story is really cool, getting the reader hooked on the plot threads and planting the seeds for future character arcs, capping it off with one hell of a cliffhanger. It really sets the bar high for the rest of the story, and it sets the stage for the events that will come in the future. On Infinity's side of things, he gets to Earth and meets a creepy guy named Pierce, who wishes to use Infinity as a personal celebrity for his own music business, making him perform for an audience of hundreds. So basically trafficking. On the rest of the gang's side, they steal a rocket ship from the Legionnaire base to go rescue Infinity, and they make their journey across the Earth to look for him. Back on their home planet, you've got Yuvan and another character named Andrew who will deploy a sentient super weapon named Afterburn to search for them, whilst they figure out what to do with them when they get back. And that's about 70% of the story from here on out. Yeah, as far as plot goes, it gets kind of thin around here, but they do make it up for the amount of time they get to develop the main cast. As they try to navigate the Earth to look for Infinity, layers of their personality slowly begin to peel off as we get a much more intimate look on their character and history, and how said history affects them personally. And on Infinity's side of things, we get to meet different characters, each of them having something different to say about Pierce, adding to the mystery around Infinity's circumstances. The most notable characters being that of Sub and Maxine, who, while sympathetic to his plight, have their own reasons for not helping him to their fullest extent. You've also got the other trafficking victims who all have generally positive things to say about him, with mostly all of them joining by their own consent instead of being abducted like Infinity was. The third subplot initially focuses on how everyone back on their home planet is dealing with the situation, but it quickly turns to focus on Afterburn. These segments don't do much to develop him as a character and act more as downtime in between major events, but it's cute enough, so that's cool, I guess. The latter half of the story really delves deep into these characters, so I'll talk about that now. Quentz is a single father of a kid named Circuit, whose mother left the both of them abruptly shortly after Circuit was born. With no one else to take care of him, Quentz practically was alone until his neighbors offered to babysit him on the occasion, which due to the current circumstances he's now faced with the terrifying possibility of not being able to see him again. Cloudburn, who's had to deal with the disappearance of his parents and their possible death, enlisted to become a Legionnaire, which in this universe is a mandatory rite of passage some individuals will have to take. And despite how hard he worked in the face of setbacks and scandalous rumors, he was ultimately turned down, leading to probably the hardest hitting moment in the series. It sucks to put your all into something only to fail in the end, as if nothing you did mattered in the slightest. And it's refreshing to see a character not devalued as an individual for their failings. Oh, and I haven't talked about Ohm yet, haven't I? During their trip, they're forced to sleep at a motel in which Cloudburn and Quentz have to share a bed. Cloudburn starts to admit that he too may have feelings for Quentz, and after coming to an agreement of how to deal with it, by the way, I will talk about this scene later, I've got a bone to pick with this one. The next morning, it's revealed Ohm set the whole thing up. Yep, he was definitely the one who set up Quentz to meet Infinity at the diner. Look at that smug little fucking devil. In all seriousness, he's probably the most proactive out of all the main cast, stepping up to get things done while the others are busy bickering with each other, and in general shows the most amount of concern for Infinity's safety and well-being. Okay, and to be honest, I doubt he really planned for most of the outcomes of his actions to bring about, since they're more likely a result of the character's inherent flaws. Man's being a much bigger bro about it than whatever the other fuckers are up to. The story is able to pace itself reasonably well, with both moments of character development and story progression abound, which gets thrown out of the window in the second to last chapter. For context, the gang are finally able to track Infinity down, and Ohm tries to talk him into coming back home, which he declines, feeling like he'd be a burden to everyone else. Pierce finds out that the others are coming to get him, so he makes an exact replica of Infinity, and it nearly fools the gang until Sub calls BS and decapitates it. Thank God he was right about it being a replica, otherwise this would have been quite the sticky situation.
He's a phony! He was programmed to do that.
Afterburn locates the gang and they ask for his help in finding Infinity. Meanwhile, Infinity and the other trafficking victims are being put on a space shuttle for another gig, when suddenly Pierce starts acting strangely and his true nature is revealed. A puppet for a force that has been pulling the strings the whole time. And it turns out to be the weird toy robot from Big Hero 6. And if this sounds like a lot of information to take in, ooh boy, we're just getting started. Infinity gets a brief moment where he looks back at the events that have happened, wondering if everyone would be better off him not existing, but no time for that though, because back at reality, Pierce revealed that he was being controlled the entire time, and the last thing he did was get donuts, and everyone is about to jump him, until one of them defends them for not being smart enough to know what he was getting himself into, and Infinity resolves to try to talk to the robot, whose name is Hollish by the way, but is nicknamed Holly by everyone else, and Infinity tries to Steven Universe everyone out of the situation, and in the process, not only does Holly have their own private dimension, but they and Sub had a relationship that ended in them erasing his memories, and after like 5 pages of back and forth that goes nowhere as Holly doubles down and launches away before the gang shows up to witness him about to kill Sub, and despite the fact they can see he has an arm cannon, Cloudburn jumps in to punch them and ends up getting shot in the stomach, and then Gwen shows up to slap him in the head with a wooden board, and that nearly gets him shot too before he's eventually detained, and everyone goes home and returns to their families. By the way, this all happens in one chapter. It's so strange because up until this point, the story takes careful time to plant its seeds all throughout over long stretches of time, and then out of nowhere it goes Mach 5 and speedruns its own climax. Holly has the potential of being a terrifying villain. In a vacuum, their powers of brainwashing, memory manipulation, and possession are terrifying concepts wrapped up into one character. Couple that with the fact that he's been trading off these robots into labor under the guise of helping them during their times of desperate need, which certainly gives him quite the edge. But he's dealt with as quickly as he's introduced, leaving no time to build him up as a character or legitimate threat until it's too late. Sure, you could make the argument that the character Pierce was his stand-in and therefore it was built up well, but even then as Pierce there's not much to let the reader feel as if he's an imposing threat to the main characters. They talk about him like he's gonna do something evil, but that's about it.
And once I get in there, man, am I gonna do something.
And oh yeah, back to that whole Cloudburn x Quence thing. I keep going back and forth over whether or not I like this plot development or not, because usually in these scenarios it ends up with one is chosen over the other, or the center of the triangle chooses neither, or the ship keeps floundering for 20 years and never properly sets sail. So I like the subversion where it's like, okay, why don't we just fuck each other? But at the same time, I feel like it kind of comes out of nowhere and takes away from their dynamic a little bit. Up until that point, they bounce off each other and their different ideas on what is best for Infinity, and it creates this unique rift between each other where you have the inside perspective that is more subjective, and you have the other that acts as an outside perspective and is more objective, which makes for some really interesting conversations early on. Then it's like, bam, they love each other now. Deal with it. The epilogue jumps forward to a few years in the future where the gang, plus Infinity, are living relatively tranquil lives raising Circuit plus 3 more children. And we get some lore before it's wrapped up in a nice little bow. You've probably noticed that I haven't talked much about the other characters. That's because they don't get to do much. All those guys back at the skater rink? Gone. Trafficked victims? Irrelevant except for like 1 or 2 panels. And it's a shame because some of these characters get really interesting introduction scenes, and have personal ties to the main cast, but they just all disappear the moment they reach Earth. Luckily though, there is a spin-off series that was made shortly after the end of MSB, that expands on these characters and gives them the fleshing out they deserve, while also expanding on the world, lore, and acts as a nice gateway to the sequel, which I'll talk about in a later video. Now if you want to read both of them, both comics are on Webtoons and Tapas as of recording. But be careful with the Webtoons one, as some of the spin-off chapters are wedged in there, and don't feature all of the chapters from the spin-off, like Tapas does, which separates them both as their own individual comics. Luckily both platforms have the main series fully intact with minor changes in terms of how it scales the images. There is a third way of reading it, and it's through archive.org. Though I wouldn't recommend it if you're a newcomer, as the pages are scattered between PNG and JPEG folders, so you'll kind of have to stitch them together to get the cohesive experience. But there is one advantage to this version that I'll talk about right now. There's a site called Waifu2X that acts as an AI upscaler They'll take whatever image files you have and re-renders it as if it were made for higher resolutions, with options for denoising. And since this comic was drawn digitally with mostly a pen tool, putting the files into this bad boy results in some ultra crisp and clean appearances, as it scales everything precisely and accurately. Sometimes denoising can produce some errors, but for the most part, that is the way to go if you want to get more out of the MSP experience. And if you don't want to upscale it but just want the denoising benefits, then you can simply not upscale it and let the denoiser do its thing. And that's it. I know I've been kind of harsh with it towards the end, but the truth is I still really like this comic. It might have some ups and downs, but overall I found the experience enjoyable. If you want a short 13-chapter comic with great characters and a cool art style, then I'd say picking this up is worth it. See ya!